Welcome to Zonie Living. I'm Bonnie Stevens. I'm here at Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff with a true American hero, Dr. Harrison Jack Schmitt, Apollo 17 moonwalking astronaut, the 12th man to walk on the moon, and also our last human connection to the moon. Welcome, sir.
My pleasure to be here.
You have had so many firsts. One of your firsts is that you were a scientist trained to be an astronaut, and your background is in geology. So you thought you had almost zero chance of becoming an astronaut, but that geology background became very important.
It certainly did, and it began really, that experience and that adventure began here in Flagstaff. With employment by Eugene Shoemaker, the famous planetologist.
Of course.
At what was called then the branch of astrogeology. And that was in 1964. And while I was here, just after I got here, NASA and the National Academy of Sciences asked for volunteers from the science community to become the group for astronauts. And I thought about 10 seconds to raise my hand and said, okay, I'll try that. I'll certainly regret it if I don't. And it happened. And I made it through the selection process and then was sent to jet pilot training at Williams Air Force Base down
right here in Arizona.
And then I went on to Houston to begin the general background training to become an astronaut, and got deeply involved in preparations for Apollo 8, Apollo 10, Apollo 11, because I had an expertise that didn't exist within the astronaut office in geology and in lunar science. And so that meant that I was deeply involved in all the missions.
So when you were working here in Flagstaff, you were working on surveying the moon at that time, is that right? Working with Gene Shoemaker and working with maps. And also I love it when you talk to Mr. Shoemaker about the possibility of you becoming an astronaut. And you were almost apologetic. You'd only been working for a short period of time with him.
Well, that's correct. As soon as I decided to volunteer, I went to Gene and Carolyn's house and sat with him and said, look, I signed up for the branch of astrogeology, but I'd like to do this. And I said, is it okay? And he said, I'd be very disappointed if you didn't.
That's absolutely right.
He had ambitions as a young man to become an astronaut, as a matter of fact, and circumstances of slightly older than the age group, but mainly his fight with Addison's disease meant that he wasn't going to be able to do that.
Sure.
When I was here, I was doing two major things. One is mapping the moon. I was part of the team that was doing geologic mapping of the moon that really gave the foundations for selecting sites to where to land on the moon. And then also, I arrived here first among a number of other geologists coming into Flagstaff, Gordon Swan being one of the principal ones. But I got here first, and so I became division chief of a group called Lunar Field Geological Methods. And we actually were trying to figure out what in the world would an astronaut do once they're on the moon? What tools would they need? How would they operate in the constraints of a pressure suit? And so I was deeply involved in that for 2 or 3 months before NASA even asked for volunteers.
Amazing, and that was very important, maneuvering in those spacesuits and trying to gather rocks and trying to teach other astronauts how to do that here in northern Arizona.
It's certainly not your grandfather's way of doing field geology, that's for sure.
And speaking of grandfathers, your dad was a geologist as well.
My father was a prominent, what we call economic geologist, expert in ore deposits and the evaluation of ore deposits in the Southwest primarily, although he worked internationally as well.
And I thought it was really interesting. In a previous interview, you told me that your parents were your role models.
Well, there's no question that, parenting is extraordinarily important, and I think it's becoming even more important today. But my mother was a graduate of Peabody College in Nashville, Tennessee, which is now part of Vanderbilt, I believe.
Okay.
And she came into Silver City, New Mexico to teach as the first woman professor at the what is now the Western New Mexico University, I believe. And and my father had come from Minnesota, working with a mining company called New Jersey Zinc Company. He was headquartered here in New Mexico, and that meant that the two of them somehow came together in that part of the state.
Yeah, and at that time, there weren't a lot of people in Silver City and in New Mexico.
Silver City was probably about 5,000 inhabitants.
Right.
It was a mining and ranching town primarily, and it has changed a lot since then, but the big copper mine at Santa Rita, New Mexico, which actually was my birthplace because it was the hospital that was available at the time. And we lived in that area, a small town called Hanover, before the family moved to Silver City.
Well, I want to take you back 50 years. You just had a birthday, and 50 years ago, you were on your mission, the Apollo 17 mission in that December year of 1972. And you talk about looking out the window and seeing the moon. And you talk about what a geologist's paradise that was.
Well, once we had landed and were able to actually get outside the Lunar Module Challenger and begin our first excursion, it was apparent that it was going to be more than I ever expected it to be in terms of the visibility that you had with a brilliant sun and a blacker than black sky. And we had actually landed in a valley that was deeper than the Grand Canyon.
Right, that's the Taurus Littrow Valley. The
Valley of Taurus Littrow was our target, and it meant that we were going to have a three-dimensional view of that portion of the moon. And that's something field geologists always like to have. A flat plain, there isn't much geology to see, but if you put a big valley in it, then you have a lot to see. And anyone who's stood on the rim of the Grand Canyon knows what I'm talking about.
Oh, yes, of course. Beautiful. One of the things that surprised you that I read about was the orange volcanic ash that you saw on the moon. And it's also interesting that there were different colors in the rocks that you found.
Well, mostly when you grind up rock, which meteors tend to do on the moon, almost every rock will turn sort of gray. Different shades of gray and otherwise. But we had, on our second excursion, one of our planned stations or stops was at a crater that was a little ambiguous. It looked sort of like an impact crater, but it might, because it was very dark and superposed on an avalanche deposit, actually, of light-colored material, we said it might be a volcanic vent of some kind. So in the back of my mind was the possibility that it was volcanic. Well, once I arrived there, it was clear it was an impact crater. There's just no question about it. And as I walked up to the rim, though, my feet stirred up some orange-looking material. And I immediately dug a trench through the half trench so that the wall was facing the sun. And it turned out that this material, it was back in the Lunar Receiving Laboratory in Houston, it was discovered that it was volcanic ash. And so even though it was an impact crater, it exposed some very fresh volcanic ash, even though that ash had erupted 3.5 billion years ago, 3.5 billion with a B, years ago. But it had been protected by debris thrown from another crater through that 3.5 billion years. And so we actually discovered something very, very fresh and very unusual, because even though the whole area had been covered by this ash eruption, what we call a pyroclastic eruption, and something like created Sunset Crater here near Flagstaff.
Absolutely.
Even though everything had been covered, it had all been mixed and incorporated in that 3.5 billion years into what we call the regolith, except for this small deposit that we discovered. I'm sure there were some others somewhere, but we only saw this one. So that was exciting, and it's turned out that these samples that we took there is giving us information we didn't expect to have, and that is information about the deep interior of the moon.
Absolutely. Well, you spent 3 days on the moon, and that was longer than any other mission. But you wish you could have spent longer.
Well, of course, you always hate to leave when you're having fun, right?
Of course.
And 3 days was all that the consumables that we had available to us would support. And so we eventually came home. But I've done some thinking about would we have changed any of our plans of where we stopped, where we went in those 3 days, and I don't think we would have. Even though the photography we had at the time was nothing like what's available today.
I can imagine, yes.
It still, the planning was good. And the training was good, and it's hard to, based on what we saw and we learned, and even with the samples that we brought back, 240 pounds of samples.
Right.
It's hard to come up with a better plan than we had. Now, if you had another day or two or three, yeah, there are places that you would go in order to verify, at least verify the information that you'd already gathered.
Well, I like how much fun you had with 1/6 gravity. And you talked about sleeping was better, walking was better. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I slept very well in 1/6 gravity,
It's good to know.
Although it's interesting that I would sleep for about 2 hours, wake up and listen to the spacecraft, because the spacecraft has a constant set of noises. And you want to make sure those noises are all the right noises, okay?
They're all there. Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, and then I'd go back to sleep, and then I'd wake up again. So I slept pretty well. We had about every day on the moon, so to speak, we had about 8 hours rest period. And I was able to get pretty good rest on the moon.
And you talk about it feeling like one big trampoline.
Well, 1/6 gravity means that in spite of the fact that you have a spacesuit on and a backpack, and your Earth weight would be about 370 pounds, on the moon, divide that by 6, say 61, 62 pounds. And so that means you can maneuver even much easier than during training here on Earth. Now, the one thing you have to remember is where your center of gravity is. And if you look at movies of astronauts on the moon, you'll see that we're all leaning forward. Well, that's because the center of gravity has moved back a little bit because of that backpack.
The backpack, sure.
So you're always leaning forward. But you got to remember that. That's one thing you have to remember. Otherwise, as some of the movies show, you'll get turned around as you cycle around that center of gravity.
Well, and it looks like it's hard to get back up after you're down.
Actually,
it's not bad?
Normally it is not, because again, with 1/6 gravity, you can, for example, if you end up on your back, you can just rotate hard and you'll roll over on your stomach, and then you can just do a push-up and you're back on your feet. The running on the moon, though, is really fun. I use a cross-country skiing technique.
Exactly, you learned that in Norway.
I learned that as a Fulbright student in Norway, spent a winter there, and it really is a very efficient way of traveling, and I've been talking with some of the astronauts now that may end up in the Artemis program that NASA has planned for return to the moon, and just encourage them to spend some time in the winter on snowfields developing that technique.
What was it, the toe push? That's so
when you're
important.
cross-country skiing, you give a toe push,
Okay.
and then you glide on the snow for cross-country skiing. Well, on the moon, you glide just above the surface.
Oh, fun.
And
That had
so
to be
you
so
can
much
keep
fun.
accelerating because nothing's going to slow you down.
Well, let's talk about the Artemis mission coming up. I believe it's still scheduled for 2025, and we have astronauts training in Arizona, of course, and you're part of helping them train. Why is it so important for us to go back, and this time to the South Pole?
Well, the South Pole has become very interesting to NASA because of a variety of evidence that there may be water ice at the poles, and other ices as well, other volatile materials that form ice. Ice are solid material. And that has interested NASA now for some time. I sort of hope actually that they will take it in smaller steps. The South Pole is a very difficult place to operate. The lighting is intense either way. It's either very bright or you're in a shadow, it's very dark. And it changes rapidly because the slow rotation of the moon is enough to, in 6 days, it'll change where you can land. So if you have a delay or something like that, it can become a problem.
Right.
And so there's some very interesting things to do scientifically, but operationally, I think it'd be wise to take it in a couple smaller steps before you actually try to land at the South Pole.
You know, you've talked before about helium-3. Why is that so important for the future of space exploration and also for the future of energy?
Well, helium-3 is one of those volatile elements that comes from the sun. It's embedded in the regolith, or the debris layer that covers the moon. And it is a light isotope, of course, of ordinary helium. It's not abundant, but it has such a high energy content when fused with itself that it becomes interesting, potentially economically, as a way to support a long-term settlement of the moon. But more importantly, when fused with itself in a power reactor here on Earth, it can provide very efficient electrical power, much more, about twice as efficient as ordinary power plants, as well as it creates no radioactive waste.
Incredible.
And so the moon is our one big nearby resource of this helium-3. And I think someday it will be an important, but not the only, but an important part of the energy mix that we have here on Earth.
During the Apollo mission era, it's important to note that we were in a Cold War with the Soviet Union, and Americans were so patriotic and so behind the space mission. Today, I believe I've heard you say that we're in a similar situation with China.
Well, there's no question that Apollo was a creature of the Cold War.
Sure.
The first landing on the moon was very more important. In fact, Apollo 8, Apollo 10, Apollo 11, and even 12, which was more or less a duplicate of the Apollo 11 mission, although they stayed for 2 excursions. That was all part of the challenge that President Kennedy gave us, and that even President Eisenhower fully recognized. He was a very important early component of Apollo. That meant that everybody was keyed up patriotically. They had courage, they had the commitment, they had the patriotism, and the competence to do what Kennedy had challenged us to do.
Which is pretty incredible.
It was a very hard driver, but at the same time, people in NASA, like George Low and Sam Phillips and people like that who were managing NASA at the time, Von Braun as well, with the Saturn V creator, they all realized that once you had the capability to go to the moon and land there, you could do other things. And that's where the science started to come in. And actually, with the Apollo 13 crew, the one crew that didn't land, we all
remember the movie.
Yeah,
Tom Hanks.
And it's a the Apollo 13 movie is one of the better movies that's been done about space, no question about that. But with that crew, we began a systematic 1 week a month field training of the astronauts, using the equipment they would have on the moon, operating pretty much as a normal, what we call EVA, extravehicular activity period, but learning how to do field geology here on Earth in a variety of locations relevant to their landing site. And so that scientific program really did take off after Apollo 12, and it has enhanced the value of the 850 pounds of lunar rocks that we have here on Earth now immensely. They are much more valuable now, and those samples are the gift that keeps on giving. After 50 years, there are still thousands of people working to learn more, not just about the moon, but about the early history of the Earth. That's probably the most important scientific thing that has come out of Apollo, and that is that we now understand what was happening on the Earth 4.5 to 3.5 billion years ago, and we just don't get that information from the Earth because it's so dynamic. It's geologically dynamic, and all of that information, almost all of it, has been destroyed.
Well, I want to talk about the technology then and the technology now, and you have a fondness for the booster that you used back then.
Well, the Saturn V was an extraordinary part of the enabling technology that put us on the moon. It could, and on our mission, Apollo 17, it put 44 metric tons of material on a trajectory to the moon. That's an immense amount of material, and it meant that you could land directly, pretty much directly on the moon. We don't have that capability today, and that makes Artemis much more complex in terms of managing the risks that you have of multiple events in order to actually get to the surface of the moon. But the Saturn V, if we had it today, would greatly simplify and greatly accelerate a return to the moon, no question about it. Now, why don't we have a Saturn V? That's because in the Johnson administration, way back then, they decided to only buy 15 Saturn Vs instead of saying, let's build the capability,
right,
purchase the capability to continue to have Saturn Vs. They decided not to do that for whatever reason, budget or otherwise. And so that meant that there was an end to the Apollo program, no matter what, because you only had 15
Limited.
of these big rockets.
And so today we're relying on a private sector for our help to get to space.
Well, that's the big difference between now and Apollo. With Apollo, NASA had to mature technologies, most of which already exist in some form or another, but Apollo matured those immensely in order to accomplish the goal of landing on the moon and returning safely to Earth that Kennedy set for us. Nowadays, though, in the last 50 years, the private sector has created a whole raft of new technologies. And NASA now has the challenge of integrating those technologies into a program to return to the moon. That's a challenge in its own right, independent of the fact that China is trying to get there too.
Sure.
And so there's this great, unfortunately somewhat unrecognized geopolitical challenge to democracy and to freedom on this planet because of the ambitions of the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, you have so much insight as a senator, a U.S. senator from New Mexico, also as an astronaut, of course, as a geologist. You have so much valuable wisdom moving forward into space. What do you see as the future of space? If you could wave a magic wand, where will we be 100 years from now?
Well, I have no doubt that human beings will settle the moon. There are some challenges in doing that, but the resources are there. Everything you need in order to survive once you've established yourself is present on the moon. And I have no doubt that that will be a stepping stone for the exploration of Mars. Maybe someday the settlement of Mars. We'll just have to wait and see how feasible that becomes. But the moon is right there. I mean, it's
within reach.
Only 3 days away. And could be even faster with certain new types of propulsion, like helium-3 fusion propulsion,
sure,
for example. And Mars is right now with chemical propulsion 9 months away, plus or minus a month or so. But again, with interplanetary fusion rockets, you can cut that time, and it's important to do that because space is hostile. Radiation in space is probably your greatest danger to human life, and we have to figure out, one, how to protect against that radiation, and two, how to shorten your exposure to it. And so, again, interplanetary fusion rockets, I think, will be very important.
Wow, such an inspiration speaking with you. Thank you so much. You are a true American hero. You give us so much motivation for the future and so much optimism for the future. We so appreciate that. Dr. Harrison Jack Schmitt, I want to thank you again so much for joining us on Zonie Living. And I just want to mention, you are our last human connection to the moon, which is amazing in itself. Thank you so much.
Well, it was a great honor and privilege for me to be actually finally get to a place where I could be the 12th person to step on the moon and to participate in a program as historically fantastic as Apollo was.
Thank you, sir.
That interview at Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff with Dr. Harrison Jack Schmitt of the Apollo 17 moon mission was a lot of fun, and it's almost impossible to believe it's been 50 years since he walked on the moon. And there is so much excitement and activity happening right now around the upcoming Artemis missions. So they're sending a crew back to the moon in 2025. Flagstaff and Lowell Observatory historian Kevin Schindler joins us now in the studio to talk about what's ahead and the role Arizona has played and continues to play in space exploration. Welcome, Kevin.
Great to see you, Bonnie.
It's so good to have you here. We're up 6 floors in Scottsdale overlooking the Papago Buttes and Scottsdale Fashion Square.
You can almost see to the moon from up here.
We're pretty close. We're closer here. Well, you and I have had a long history. We've conspired together to bring some astronauts to town. Those that have walked on the moon, like Charlie Duke with the Apollo mission 12.
Bean. Yep.
Alan Bean, Apollo 16, is that right?
He was Apollo 12.
Apollo 12, thank you.
And we were kind of working the same event when Neil Armstrong, the first person to walk on the moon, was here.
That was a moment. That was amazing.
I listened to that recording and I still get chills the way he talked about going to the moon, but he was so humble, and he was talking about being involved in a experiment, and he was just a technician, and he was deploying experiments. Then you realize he's talking about flying to the moon and being the first person to walk on it. It's really amazing.
Just incredible, and how these men and their lives have changed. You know, they were just doing their thing. For example, Jack Schmitt was a geologist.
Right. He started out in geology, had no interest in going to the moon, but it kind of evolved. He got a job in Flagstaff, and Flagstaff was at the forefront of preparing to go to the moon, and it just worked out great. And because of his studies in geology, that's why he went to the moon. He was brilliant. He was a geologist. He'd helped train the earlier astronauts. It just worked out great.
Yeah, I can't imagine, you know, when he was a kid and people would ask, what do you want to do when you grow up? I mean, there was no such thing as I want to be an astronaut.
No, his dad was, I think, a mining engineer, so he probably was going to follow in his footsteps in some capacity. But boy, what a trip he took. And then he went to become a senator.
Right.
He's
What a full
done a
life
little bit
he's
of
had.
everything.
Yes, and he continues to be involved in the Artemis missions that they're training for right now. You know, you brought him to Flagstaff to be the Grand Marshal in the 2022 4th of July parade. And that must have been interesting, driving him around, driving a man who has walked on the moon around town and getting him places.
Well, it was great because he was staying in Sedona. This is his travel year. This is the 50th anniversary of his flight. This was the last manned flight of the Apollo program, and so he's the only crew member left that's still alive. And so he's involved in so many activities this year. He was in Alaska. He flew in like July 2nd, drove from New Mexico to Sedona the next day, then drove up to Flagstaff for the 4th, then back to Sedona that night. And it's just this whirlwind.
And this man is so full of life. It's just incredible. And he had just had a birthday on July 3rd, right?
Right. The day before, he turned 80, I believe it's 87.
87. That's what I thought too. Yeah. And so full of life and so sharp and such an impressive man.
And you think, you know, he's been serving our country for more than 50 years now, you know, as an astronaut, as a senator, and still today. It's remarkable and inspiring, I think. And it reminds me of, you know, like Jimmy Carter. After he retired or his presidency was over, look what he's done. As a former president, he's in his 90s and he's still helping build houses. And, you know, age doesn't have to get in the way of doing anything.
It sure doesn't. And what an inspiration to know that these people are still so full of life and still contributing so much.
And you see, I mean, it's inspiring because you see people that are familiar with the missions that remember that era and many who are part of it to help go to the moon. And so he continues to inspire them. But the next generation, you know, you talked about him working with Artemis astronauts and helping to share his experiences, what it was like on the moon. So it's, you know, he spans generations. And I have to give a personal anecdote. When he arrived, he and his lovely wife just parked at our house, and I gave him a ride over to the parade grounds when he was in Flagstaff. And my granddaughter was there, and she shared a birthday with him the day before.
Oh,
and so he
great.
gave her a little birthday present. It was so sweet. And you know, she just turned 9, and she's inspired.
Oh my goodness!
You know, she
nobody has that kind of birthday party when they're 9 years old. That's quite a guest to have at your party.
Okay, this is the 12th. 12 people have walked on the moon. This is the 12th one, and he just gave me a birthday present. It was just neat, and that's how the astronauts are in general. You know, they did this, but they understand its meaning to humankind and how it continues to inspire people, not just about the past, but about where we're going in the future.
You know, Kevin, you have met so many astronauts. So many people have been involved in missions. They may not have been walking on the moon, but they've brought greatness to the human race, truly. And so I wanted to ask you, is there a common thread, is there a characteristic that you've noticed that these individuals of this elite class have?
Well, I think in reading about them, there was a drive for excellence and a drive to, you know, it was very political back then. It was a drive to serve the country. That was when I read about them. Afterwards, in meeting so many of them, I think it was a sense of honor and duty.
Yeah.
That their country needed them, and they went to bat. Because you think about the first astronauts, and all of them that went to the moon, they're going 250,000 miles away in a capsule the size of a telephone booth, a little bigger. And one thing goes wrong, like we saw in Apollo 13, you don't know if you're going to make it back.
Right.
So you go out there, your
movie.
life is on the line. You think about going to work. How many people go to work and not sure if they're going to come home alive? There's certainly a lot, but this is, kind of the peak of it. They're the ones that went and put their lives on the line. I think something else that I've seen is how grateful they were because, it's been decades since, but they're the ones that everybody recognizes. They're the ones that went to the moon. But they to each one that I've ever heard talk or see, they talk about the 400,000 other people,
They absolutely
the engineers
do.
and technicians and other people who helped make sure everything was running. They're the ones that are on the front page of the newspaper, but it's all those other people. And they all, pay attention to those and are so grateful for the work for those 400,000 people.
Yeah, just stellar human beings, so humble and so smart.
And I think it's for me, it's inspiring to see them because you're hearing the stories of people who have, done something with their lives. And it's not seeing people that are famous for the sake of seeing them. It's you want to absorb that energy. I think they've done something.
yeah.
They dedicated their lives. What can I learn from that?
Right.
How can I use that to make the world a better place like they have?
Well, there's so much I want to talk to you about. You were heavily involved in the Lunar Legacy campaign that happened in Flagstaff in 2019. And really that was such an amazing event because the whole community got involved, from artists to restaurateurs to city officials, and the whole town was right involved. And I feel that swell happening again because with the Artemis missions, just like every astronaut who's ever trained on the moon has trained in Flagstaff. And I want to take you back. And Kevin, you've done so much work as a historian and so much writing about what the times were like back then. So take us back to the 1960s and what kind of buzz was happening in northern Arizona.
Well, it was a time of anticipation, but if we put it in context, the 1960s were difficult. I mean, the country and the world were having a lot of problems. We had civil unrest. We had a lot of issues going on in the country, and what we're living through today, right now, it feels like
It's a little similar, doesn't it?
There's
Yes.
a lot of a lot of issues going on, and so this project was something that a lot of people worked on. And while everything else was going on in the world, this was something we all hung our hats on. And these guys, when they came to town, they were like rock stars. It was like, it's the same era as like the Beatles coming.
Absolutely.
Because
That's right.
they're the saviors. We have this mentality that we must beat the Russians to the moon. And that's what the big push was. They're the saviors. They're the ones that are going to do it. They're the ones putting their lives on the line. So when they came to town, like they did anywhere they trained, people came out and wanted to see them. They showed up at the little Flagstaff airport, and people would come out with cameras.
Isn't that wild?
Oh, it's
in the
great.
1960s, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, you can imagine today.
You can pretty much walk to the plane.
Right, yeah.
Right.
If selfies were a thing back then,
Yeah.
you could see that they get off the plane. Everybody's going to be doing selfies. It was a similar thing back then. And in fact, at some point later in their training, they got to where they didn't invite media as much because it just would turn into a circus. They were there to train, and they
do
had
a job.
My gosh, they had
Yes.
to learn how to, fly rockets to the moon. And oh, by the way, we're going to do geology and stay alive. And there's so many things, and PR is part of it, but still, there's only so many hours in the day.
You've got to stay focused.
Right.
Well, I thought it was really interesting. A couple of years ago, you and I went wandering out in the desert of the high country, and we were out there almost to the Little Colorado, I think.
Yes.
And we were trying to find the craters. Back in the 60s, the USGS and Jet Propulsion Laboratory and NASA, and they were all working out there, and they wanted to blow up some craters and recreate the moon out there, right? They wanted to do that.
You think about preparing to go to the moon, how expensive it is and how little time you have. You want to practice everything.
Sure.
And so Meteor Crater, the best preserved impact crater on Earth, a great analogy to what they see on the moon, but it's one crater. It doesn't represent the terrain that they're going to walk over and plant instruments for experiments, plant the flag, eventually drive the rover. There wasn't a field like that. And so NASA worked with USGS, and they created this crater field with more than 100 craters using explosives. And based on an actual image of the moon, they plotted out the distance of the craters, the sizes, planted explosives and blew them up. And it was so successful. Now the material wasn't quite the same. It wasn't this powdery surface, but the terrain, the topography with the craters and such, it was a really good match. So they ended up making 3 different fields. And one of those, the one that you and I saw, those were test holes where they were looking to put another field. They ended up not using that field, I think because it was so far from the center of operations.
It was quite a ways out there.
Yeah, but those craters are still there. And it's a testament to how many people were involved and how many different things we know about. This is where the astronauts trained. And that's the case with so many things. We remember, the famous pictures, but there's so much behind it.
But there's so much work behind it.
It's the tip of the iceberg that we remember.
I think we were out on Babbitt Ranches, which,
Yes.
they had cattle out there when they were blowing up these craters and had people in spacesuits wandering around. So it makes you wonder, it's all there. Arizona, where you do it all together all at the same time.
Talk about an alien landscape.
Yeah.
Imagine if you walked out there and didn't know what was going on. And so, okay, these cows and there's, what is that? It's like an alien out there.
And that's happening again in the coming years as we have astronauts training in suits out there.
And I think that's the important thing about this to me is, as a historic footnote, all that stuff happened and that it helped the astronauts be successful on the moon.
Yeah.
But it also was a foundation for what is to come. We're 50 years later and today's astronauts are still going to Babbitt Ranches and other places around Arizona to prepare for the Artemis mission, which, we have a launch later this year, in a couple of weeks actually, that's going to be uncrewed. And then in 2024, there's going to be a crewed mission that orbits around the moon. And then again, if all goes well, the next year, 2025, there's going to be humans walking on the moon again. And they'll have prepared in Arizona.
Yeah. Arizona,
among other places, of course, but following the footsteps of the original pioneers, they're coming back.
That's so amazing. I wanted to talk about Lowell Observatory, which, of course, you work there as the historian for Lowell Observatory, and that place has had so many contributions to science. So let's talk about a little bit about that. Now, Lowell was there before the city became a city.
Right. Lowell was there before the state became a state.
Right.
So the observatory, Percival Lowell, a wealthy, basically business person from the East, and the Lowell family, if you've heard of Lowell's, it's part of that family. And
They're still involved.
Yes, right. He came out in 1894 to set up an observatory, and that was 18 years before Arizona was even a state. And so we think about the Wild West, we think about cowboys and railway people. In northern Arizona, throw in scientists.
Right.
I mean, this is not an image you usually imagine as lumbermen, and cowboys rubbing shoulders with scientists.
In the frontier. Well, what I always imagine is the dinner parties. The dinner parties, you've got your cowboys, you've got your lumberjacks, you've got your astronomers, you've got your educators, you've got your politicians. That's what Flagstaff was.
Right. You imagine the coat rack.
Yeah.
And the different types of hats that are hanging there.
That's good. That's funny.
It's amazing the diversity, and that was not just Flagstaff, Arizona, also, but the observatory started in Flagstaff, and it was the first permanent scientific organization in northern Arizona, and probably in Arizona at all.
And of course, Pluto was discovered.
Right in 1930, Clyde Tombaugh discovered Pluto at the age of 24.
Wow. What were you doing at the age of 24?
I wasn't discovering a planet. I know that. I was probably trying to remember how to spell my name.
That's so amazing. Lowell has so much going on. I want to talk about one of the recent amenities that you have there, and that's the Geology Open Deck Observatory, fondly known as the GODO. And that has, is it 6 telescopes that are on that?
Right, 6 telescopes. Visitation to the observatory pre-COVID was skyrocketing, if you pardon the astronomy pun a little bit. But so we needed to do something. We wanted to expand the facilities because we wanted to give a world-class experience. And it's hard to do that when people are parking down the road or there's not enough restrooms. And so phase 1 was the Geo Valley Open Deck Observatory.
Which is gorgeous.
And John and Ginger Giovanni, who are spectacular patrons of northern Arizona, one of many things they've contributed to the observatory, They were the lead sponsor, but there was a bunch of people who contributed. And this was phase one, to where we open this. It's like this big hangar that the whole building rolls back.
Right.
And there's six telescopes.
It's so impressive. And they're gorgeous.
And they're
works of art.
They are. There's one that looks like it was built 100 years ago, but it's modern. It's just kind of a steampunk look as a throwback to our other historic telescopes up there. But it's great because there are different types of telescopes allowing you to look at space in different ways and to see different things.
And you can see the sun too.
Right? we have a specially filtered solar telescope that we set up every day that's clear. You can go and safely see the sun in its activity.
So you don't have to wait till nighttime to go visit Lowell.
No, there's something you can see, if it's clear, day or night. And then at nighttime, the building opens up and you have the famously dark skies of northern Arizona. The world's first international dark sky city is Flagstaff. And so we celebrate that by sharing that with visitors from around the world, and to be able to look through those telescopes. And the location is so Lowell Observatory, because Lowell, we have this heritage of research and sharing the results with the public. And so 50 yards from where little Susie or Johnny are discovering the sky for themselves for the first time, 50 yards away is where Clyde Tombaugh discovered Pluto. And so in the shadows of that dome are these telescopes. It's just such a special feel. You look up and you're inspired. You look around and you're inspired.
And Percival Lowell was really ahead of his time when he was really wanted to open this up. He wanted astronomy to be open to the public. He wanted everyone to have an interest in it and to learn about it.
Yeah, Percival Lowell said, "What's the point of doing science unless you share it with humankind in general?" And his thought was to make people co-discoverers. I might be the scientist, but let me share this with everybody, so humankind can share in the excitement. Like when we're talking about the astronauts going to the moon in the 1960s, however many billion people watched around the world, they were co-discoverers. And it's one of those signature moments.
In real time.
You remember where you were. Most people, you ask them certain things like that.
Sure.
Unfortunately, more often than not, it's a disaster sort of thing.
Oftentimes.
For me, John Lennon being assassinated in 1980, I think it was. Certain moments like that stick with you. Landing on the moon, for a moment in time at least, we were all humans. We were all, members of the human race on planet Earth, and our brothers were up there on another world. If for that moment it gave us hope, I think that, when we have a common cause, we're all the same. We can work together.
Yeah, it still gives me chills.
It does. And you think, as we said, they were the ones who walked on the moon, but 400,000 people who were directly involved, and then a heck of a large cheering audience. And there are a lot of cheerleaders around the world.
For sure.
Really, really inspiring. And we're on the doorstep of doing that again.
So incredible. I wanted to step back to Lowell just for a minute. You've got a big Discovery Center opening. Is it in 2024? Is that the date?
Right, 2024. So I was saying phase one of our expansion for our visitors is the GODO, the Open Deck Observatory, and that's kind of like the appetizer. Mm-hmm. In 2024, our new visitor center, 40,000 square feet, so it's several times larger than our current visitor facility, and will allow us to bring in so many more visitors, but also give them so many experiences. The center is 3 stories high, and part of the top, for instance, is an open planetarium. We think of planetaria with, you sit back in a chair, look up at a ceiling with stars projected. We got dark skies. We're using the real thing. There's no roof. You look up, the seats are heated.
The seats are heated chilled. And they recline.
Yes.
Right? That is my best part, my favorite part of this new construction.
And that's just one aspect of it. But it really makes Lowell Observatory in Arizona a world destination for astronomy.
Yeah, well, I want to give a shout out to Jeff Hall for being such a visionary and such a great leader over at Lowell Observatory. And all of this has just happened in the last, not very many years.
Yeah, Jeff has been part of Lowell since he was a grad student. I think he did his postdoc. I think that was his title. But he's been here his entire career, and he's done everything at Lowell. He was a world-class scientist. He led the development program, the fundraising at one point. He led the education program at one point, the technical staff. He's done it all. And working with Lowell Putnam, who is our founder's great-grandnephew, talking about leadership and vision, and then having an advisory board and staff and so many supporters, not just in Flagstaff or Arizona, but around the world.
Yeah, world-class destination, that's for sure.
And it feels like a smaller scale, but we compare things to other things, and to me it's kind of like a mini Apollo program, much smaller scale, but still people working for a common cause with a definite goal in mind. And when we work together, we can achieve it.
And when we were talking about millions of dollars to make this happen, that must have just seemed so distant.
Gosh, it hasn't been that many years ago where our fundraising department, it was 1 or 1.5 people. Now we have 8 or 9 full-time people. It's just like Apollo, again, smaller scale, but if you're going to achieve something great, you have to have the resources. And that starts with the people, having the right people.
Kevin, as exciting as the 1960s were with the Apollo missions, I kind of feel, maybe you do too, I kind of feel like the Apollo missions were like our parents' mission, that belonged to that generation. But this Artemis mission, I just got chills. It feels so personal. I mean, we know some of the people that are training as astronauts. We know some of the people who are training them. We know people who are in the International Space Station. I mean, this is so close.
And something else, the connection, Artemis is the mythological character that's the sister of Apollo.
Oh, okay. I remember reading about that.
And one of the first short-term goals of Artemis is to send women and people of color to the moon. And then longer range plans are develop a base there and such. But it does make it something for all of us. Back in the 1960s, it was extremely exciting. People around the world of all genders and races celebrated, but it was a very small minority of people that went to the moon. Now it's open to anybody. So people in kids that are in classrooms around the world, it feels more real that I can do that. It doesn't matter where I'm from, I can make this happen.
Isn't that amazing? There's a picture that we had taken a couple of years ago in 2019. You and I are both in it. Moonwalker, Charlie Duke is in it, and the astronaut training class is in there. And so I know you and I just geek out when we look at this because these people are the future of space travel.
And that's what I look at that picture, and I get chills in it, partly because we've worked together so long.
Right.
And that was something we were able to work on together. But then the heritage. We have one of the guys who walked on the moon, one of the original pioneers. And then there's another astronaut in there, Don Pettit.
Oh, that's right.
Who is the shuttle astronaut who went into space several times. And then there's it was the 2017 class of astronauts, class 22. And you look at those faces, and some of them are going to be walking on the moon in just a couple of years.
It's just amazing.
There are several, I think 8 of them from that team are on the Artemis team right now.
Is that right?
And you think of geologists in Arizona, in Flagstaff, that are training them, just like the geologists did 50 years ago.
Yeah, friends of ours.
Friends of ours, yeah. And what's neat for me is they're now friends with the astronauts and going to launches and things like that. So it's like you said, the personal connection, and it's something that Arizona should be proud of.
Oh, yeah.
And we've been focusing on Flagstaff, but holy cow, all of Arizona, Arizona State University, University of Arizona, there's so many efforts with mapping that have been tied through the years. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, that's the one that if you see images, close-up images of the moon, and you can see the tracks where the astronauts walked, that's from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. And the camera for that is operated by ASU.
Okay.
And so it's that history. It's still happening today across the entire state. The parachutes for the Orion capsule that the astronauts will fly to the moon, they tested those parachutes down in Yuma a couple of years ago. So that lots of different connections.
Boy, we have so much to be proud of here in Arizona. Kevin, you bring history to life, and that's why I so love talking to you. You've written a number of books. I have one of them right here, and I also have my Kevin Schindler collection in my own library. And so tell us, just give us a couple of ideas about what these books are about.
Well, I was in our education program at Lowell for years, and I managed it for I don't know how many years. And one of the things that I wanted to do, I always liked the history, but also, again, as the foundation for what's happening today. Our scientists today are making incredible discoveries with one of the most powerful telescopes in the world. And to be able to connect the two is really fun for me. And so what I wanted to do in working the program was to try to contribute something for our guests to come, 100,000 plus visitors at that time, something they can take home. And so we did several different kind of gift shop books about, the observatory in general, about the classic Clark refractor that everybody looks through. And if you've watched the science education program, at some point that telescope's been featured in it. And so trying to do things that really bring that out. You and I did a book about the Festival of Science.
We did, yes.
And the Festival of Science, you were involved from the very beginning.
Yeah, 30 years.
30 years.
I don't like to say that because it really ages me.
Wow,
but
when
yeah,
did you start?
I know, think about that. Yeah.
It was like a 6th grade project, right?
That's right. Yeah.
But the Festival of Science is one of the oldest science festivals in the world.
I'm so proud of what we've been able to do with that. And you've been on the board, you've been president, haven't you, of the board?
Yeah, I think I did 2 rounds.
A few times, yeah, I thought so. Yeah.
You told me what to do and I did it. I think that's how it worked with being on the board.
That's how I like to roll.
Yes, right. But that's an example of how Arizona takes science seriously, not just the scientists, but as a community.
Right.
Because in 1990, community leaders, not just scientists, but business leaders and educators said, we've got this incredible science, we should celebrate it. You have beer festivals, art festivals, sports festivals. Let's have a science festival. And they created what is an incredible experience. This year we have one of the leading Egyptologists coming that
Zonie
you've worked
Living,
with.
yes,
Right.
one of my favorites, yes.
And I think through the years, the astronauts alone that have come, Jack Schmitt was one of the first speakers, Alan Bean, Charlie Duke. We've had shuttle astronauts, Don Johansson, who discovered the fossil hominid Lucy.
Right, from ASU.
Yep, ASU here. Yeah. So what a heritage.
It's just unbelievable. And the amazing thing to me, Kevin, is I hear from people talking all the time that are doing science festivals in other places, and they're saying, how do you have basically a lecture and the whole town has to go? You have more than 1,000 people show up for basically a lecture. And I think that's what's so cool about the culture of Flagstaff is that there is that education, that discovery, that sense of excitement and adventure and science and education and STEM.
And definite pride in it. And,
definite pride.
I think it gets, as humans, I think we're explorers deep down. And so even in our busy lives, we think about people going to another planet or another body like the moon. Well, on one hand, for some people, that's so separate. How can I think about that when I'm trying to feed the kids?
Sure.
On the other hand, it also it gives us hope. And it's also just something inspiring that whether you have money or not, whatever your condition, especially if you have kids, there's hope that you can grow up to do something like this. And if it's not this, whatever you want to do, maybe it's not going to the moon, but this shows you that if you put your mind to something, you can make it happen.
And that's what everyone has said that we've had speak with us is talking about that focus and that just taking the steps to get there, to get where they want to be.
Yeah, you come up with a plan and the sky, the saying is the sky is the limit, but at a place like Lowell Observatory, the sky is the starting point. That's just so.
It's just the first step.
Yes, and so why dream small? Dream big.
Well, Kevin, it's always such a joy to have you here. So, of course, Kevin Schindler, Lowell Observatory historian, also Flagstaff's historian. You've got so many interests, and I know baseball is one of them.
I do have a little interest. I was there when Luis Gonzalez hit the bloop single to win the 2001 World Series.
Oh my gosh!
So excited! We were upstairs along the third base line.
What a memory!
Oh my gosh!
I watched it on TV, but I can't imagine being there.
The stadium was rocking, and everybody's shaking their white pom-pom things. And I watched the video, and I can still feel it. It's there's so many great things in life. Sports is an entertainment for so many of us. But to see again a community come together,
Yes.
and for Arizona, for Phoenix, to see something,
We can
I
all
think-
get behind.
right. And I think
Yeah.
it's when you work, you want to do the best you can, and to reach the pinnacle of your profession, whether it's space or sports or business or picking up the trash, to do the best you can do and to be at the top of your profession it's a satisfying thing.
It's that greatness. It's that greatness that
Yep.
we all are inspired by.
Right, and that's why things like going back to the moon, it shows us that we can do things. We put our minds to something, we can achieve great things.
We can achieve greatness and excellence. That's awesome. Wonderful point to end on. Thanks so much for joining Zonie Living.
Great to see you, Bonnie.
Good to see you too, Kevin. If you want to find out more about Lowell Observatory, you can go to lowell.edu. And you can also check out Kevin Schindler's books in the bookstore at Lowell and on Amazon. Carrying on the mission theme, our next guest has been developing a unique leadership game. It's called Missions and Madness. I caught up with filmmaker and game maker Morgan Boatman as he was leading a group through activities in the forest. The participants were dodging some of the challenges that show up in the game, like pirates, ninjas, and T-Rex. Morgan Boatman joins us now from Flagstaff. Hi, Morgan.
Hi, Bonnie.
Great to have you with us today. Where are you talking to us from?
I'm here in my office in Flagstaff. I tried to get a signal outside, but it didn't work.
Well, Missions and Madness is a game that teaches us many things. It teaches us about teamwork, leadership, and situational awareness. And it starts with the roll of a dice, which sometimes feels like life itself. You talked to me about 3 aspects that you wanted to show in this game, and 3 aspects that get us through life, like finding a direction, taking action on that direction, and not giving up. So tell us how that fits into the game.
Well, life can be overwhelming if you don't have the skills to find a direction, commit to that direction, and if you don't have the skills to follow through with action toward that direction, and if you ever feel like giving up. So those are the 3 main components that I try to teach to participants in Missions and Madness. And I learned that from a lot of extra training, extracurricular training, you might say.
Well, I know that about you. You're one of those guys that likes to push the limits of your physical ability. You are an advanced martial artist. I've seen you in Buffalo Park out there. You incorporate push-ups into your hike. I mean, the hike can be strenuous enough, but he adds push-ups. You add push-ups. And I know you've participated in military-type survival training that calls for such things as carrying 30 pounds of bricks on your back for 12 hours at a time and other strenuous tasks. So I know you're a big believer in exercise, and that comes through in the game. So tell us a little bit about how that shows up.
Well, it's more and it's less than just exercise, Bonnie. The real concept is functional fitness. So those bricks, for instance, they make everything a little bit harder. So the push-ups are a little bit harder, and then the hike's a little bit harder. But that's not for everybody. So what I did was I took my experience in situations like that, and I made it scalable, not only to the group that's playing, but the individual who's playing. So they don't have to bring bricks, and they don't have to do push-ups. Everything is at everyone's individual level.
But they might end up blindfolded.
In order to build a functional team, sometimes we need people who are who require additional assistance, you might say. So
that comes through in Missions and Madness.
That's right.
And sometimes you have other challenges, like you may roll the dice and find out that somebody needs to be carried by the rest of the team members.
That's right. There's nothing so powerful as carrying someone to build a team of complete strangers.
Right. Right. Well, one of the participants I spoke with described Missions and Madness as part boot camp, part scavenger hunt. And I really like that description. I thought that was a pretty accurate assessment. And one of the components of the game involves KIM. I've never heard this before. KIM drills. That's K-I-M. Tell us about that.
Well, KIM stands for Keep in Mind, and it's a way to remind yourself to look around and gather information from your surroundings. So that's incorporated in the game, and it keeps you from, just sort of zoning out and getting that 1,000-yard stare as you walk from objective to objective.
And I know that you've been working on this game for about 7 years. I want to talk. Let's bring in the madness part. So that's where the pirates come in. And the first time I heard that just made me laugh. So tell everyone how that fits.
Well, there's a random choice of 12 scenarios that the team gets assigned by the dice. That, for instance, you mentioned the pirates. To bond the team, acting silly in public or acting silly in a group is a great way to create a bond, a team bond. So, for instance, if you roll pirates, every time the assistant team leader calls out contact, everyone has to act like a pirate. And if there's ninjas, then when the assistant team leader calls out contact, everybody has to run and hide. It's just like hide and seek. So it's a great way for grown-ups, mostly, to have fun. Kids don't have a problem having fun, but grown-ups do.
Well, it helps us a lot, and I think it is so much fun. And as you mentioned, with a group of strangers, you get to just be silly. I know that the game is really gaining traction these days. You've got a conference that I know you're going to be presenting it at. You're also involved with ROTC at Northern Arizona University.
Yeah.
Congratulations, by the way. And so tell us of all the things, all the opportunities that are coming up for you.
Well, the first one is the next NASET game, the business incubator up here in Flagstaff. That'll happen on the 23rd of September. After that, we have the Flagstaff Festival of Science. You can register for a game either on the 25th of September or the 2nd of October. And you mentioned the conference, the Therapeutic Recreation Conference we've been invited to. That's also in September. So we have a lot of fun stuff coming up.
Boy, I know. So we should just mention the Flagstaff Festival of Science is a 10-day event of free activities for the whole family. It's in September every year, and that's so cool that you're going to be demonstrating at that time. Morgan, I'm hoping that I'll be able to buy this game for Christmas presents this year.
We're on track to make that a reality. And it'll include a field guide like this with all the answers to all your questions about missions and madness, and a manual for the field with your objectives and all the exercises required, and some dice.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Well, Morgan Boatman, entrepreneur, filmmaker, game changer, and leadership development, thank you so much for sharing your missions and madness game with us today. Best of luck to you, my friend.
Thank you so much, Bonnie.
It was great to see you.
You too.
And to find out more about Morgan Boatman and missions and madness, you can go to flagstaffbusinessnews.com or quadcitiesbusinessnews.com, or check out Morgan's website at missionsandmadness.com. I hope you've enjoyed the many missions we've explored today. No doubt we are in exciting times, exploring how to set up a base camp on the moon, with Arizona playing a key role, and picking up some helpful leadership skills along the way. Thank you for joining Zonie Living, Business, Adventure, and Leadership. I'm Bonnie Stevens.